Hello and welcome to Centrify's video Chalk Talk series. I'm David McNeely, the Director of Product Management here at Centrify, and with me today is Kayne McGladrey. He's one of our senior professional services consultants. We're going to dive a little bit more deeply into deploying Centrify DirectControl and how we can use zones as a way to augment the deployment and to enable rapid deployment within the enterprise environment. In a lot of cases, we find that integration into an Active Directory environment is typically done with Windows machines in sort of an grant all access type of a model. And for the Unix environment, that really doesn't quite work. You know, on a Windows machine, anybody can walk up to a Windows computer, and as long as I have an Active Directory account, I get to log into that machine, given that it's joined to the same Active Directory environment that my account is in. But on a Unix system, typically we want to grant more restrictive access to those systems, and we typically, while we would like to be able to integrate those into Active Directory for identity management, really only want to enable the user to be able to access a very subset of those systems. So in the Unix environment, typically what we're also finding is that within large organizations, there's this need to integrate those computers into the directory, yet the Unix identity management has grown up over time. And the reason for this is that there's typically several departments where the user accounts have been created based on as-needed type of a model. And that would translate to the single user within the directory having an account on many different Unix systems where the Unix identity might be different, depending on which department his user account was created in and the timing as to when it was created. And since each of these departments might be managing their Unix systems completely independently, we end up with many different Unix namespaces created for each of those Unix computers. And with me today is Kayne McGladrey. We'll talk about what he's finding within the market. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the computer systems that you found in the Unix namespace within the Unix environments that you've been working in?
Sure. Thanks, David. Something I'm finding, there's a lot of, across all industries, you'd think there'd be a lot of diversion or variability in terms of the quality and consistency of their Unix implementations. And I can't say that's actually wholly true. Often what I'm finding is there's a lot of common threads that run across, say, a California-based entertainment company, is actually finding that they generally have the same Unix operational challenges as, for example, a Midwestern retail company. You know, you'd think just the differences in geography or in industry would somehow make it different, and actually, even with the platforms, we're finding that it's very common that the problems across a Linux-only environment are actually business pains and challenges that are shared with Solaris-only shops or shops that have got a mixed heterogeneous environment, say OS 10 and AIX and HPUX and Solaris again. We're seeing a lot of that commonality in the market today, which is probably one of the bigger design challenges we have in larger environments is just the nature of the beast, how long Unix has been around for. And I don't think any of these problems we're finding are new. It's just that because we're playing across so many platforms and also industries that we're uncovering them wholesale.
So what kind of problems are you typically finding? Is it account management is different on each of the systems, or is it?
Well, like you said, it's different departments have different processes for managing accounts. And something that Active Directory really got straight up in its inception was the idea of account termination and consolidated account termination. Mm-hmm. In Unix, we've always been good at account provisioning. We've always been fabulous at account provisioning. It's that other whole part of it. Oh, exactly. Yeah, it's really easy to create users, and actually that's what a lot of people have done, is created a lot of users. And what we're finding is, you know, an individual user across a broad swath of Unix systems is going to have multiple identities. They're going to have multiple passwords that they're managing. And that user might not even work for the company anymore. They might have been terminated 5 years ago, and their account is still active. So we're finding that's just one of those sticky problems, is going through and actually determining who works here, who should actually be authorized to use this system, And having it back-ended by Active Directory is great because once you get to that consolidated spot, there's only one account to actually disable or remove that removes all of those access points.
Sounds like you're actually doing a little bit of account cleanup in the process of discovery.
Oh, lots. There was a manufacturing company, and I thought, wow, this place is great. They had 3,000 Unix accounts and long legacy Unix shop, and you think, wow, that's big, heavy investment in Unix, and they had 2,000 Active Directory accounts, which was sort of interesting because company policy was you were supposed to be provisioned by the Active Directory people to have Unix access. They'd also just recently went through some restructuring, and they had less than that for employees, less than 3,000. So there was a big schism right there on who works here, who should have access to my critical Unix systems. And this was a publicly traded company, which is why I can't give specific details. And that's a big SOX compliance violation there, is being able to actually produce a report of who has access on your systems. And because they were doing primary GID-based role authorization for sudoers, that's killer right there. Just being able to determine who has administrative permissions on my server, and you find out it's a dead account for somebody who worked for the company who was a contractor 6 months ago on an external-facing gateway system. You don't want an auditor to find that.
Right. So you run across any simpler environments that are easier to migrate?
I'd say so. The newer Unix environments just do not have a large legacy footprint. Sometimes can be well managed and sometimes can't be, just as the older environments can be, if they've been well managed, it makes it easier to do. I don't think that account size is necessarily a precipitator of how easy it will be to migrate. Often what we find in newer environments is that there's only been one standard. And in Unix we have history, and when I say history, Unix has been around for 30 years. We've had multiple conventions that have been applied over the years, and subsequently, when you've got an IT director who came in the 80s and made it all one way, and so the user accounts that were created in the 80s were one way, and you actually still find user accounts that are that old in some of these shops. It's very different, when the 90s come and you've changed your naming convention for something as stupid as an account name. In the newer shops, that problem just doesn't exist because they don't have that crushing weight of history behind them.
Right. Okay, well, can you explain what you normally do with respect to integrating our products or integrating those machines into an Active Directory environment for some of these complex accounts?
Sure. I'd say the first step, really, these days, is to determine how many of the machines are actually feasible for a deployment target and what type of deployment target. We have a utility we're using heavily in professional services called AD-check. It's a Unix binary, runs on everything under the sun except IRIX. And it actually, we've got it to the point where we actually have a centralized command and control unit called Deployment Center that we in professional services use. It just gives us reporting. And what it'll do is deploy AD-check to a client machine, run AD-check, determine if that machine is actually a valid deployment target. And that means things like disk space, patch levels, network connectivity, DNS configuration, just really basic rote stuff that we used to have to manually do in professional services. We'll start there. After we've determined, what is actually in valid target scope of deployment, then it's really around population analysis. More than anything else, a design has to consider the existing Unix user population and how it's been managed over the years. And that's, it's not just a mathematical equation. It's a conversation that happens with a customer about, well, this is what you've got. Is this necessarily even right? Are these the roles and rights you want to grant to these personnel? Are they authorized to get at the correct systems?
And you're talking about both user access as well as administrative management responsibilities.
Yeah. The way that we'll do that is we have a design document, and the template starts at, I think, 40-ish pages now of just questions that we've learned over the years to start asking customers for things to consider. And we'll work through them with that, and it's things like that we'll find via AD check, right? So a lot of those questions we're finally, the rote system stuff, we can find those out ourselves, which is cool. But things like, well, who should have access to this type of machine? How do you logically see these machines? Are these owned by engineering, ergo they're engineering machines, or are they owned, do they all run WebSphere, so they're J2EE machines? Mm-hmm. Or is it some combination where both user populations need to have access, and additionally, different roles within that access? So the one would be the administrator, one would be a developer on that platform. And then on top of that, we end up overlaying population analysis. That we'll do by collecting all of the password and group files off of all of the Unix hosts, mm-hmm. as well as any other NSS-registered data sources like netgroups or NIS. I mentioned netgroups because that's actually one of our bigger design challenges we're having lately, is we're finding how many different ways there are to grant authorizations just via netgroups on top of an existing NIS domain. And then things like registered LDAP data sources. And then what we'll do is we're applying the 80-20 rule these days. So if we're told that maybe we've got a group of machines and they're owned by engineering, right? And so here we've got server 1 and server 2, right? If these two have got, I'll make the math really simple. If we've got two servers with 10 users, if we find out that 8 out of those 10 are in common, and there's no regulatory reasons or process reasons that would prevent these additional 2 personnel from having had access to this machine, we'll say, hey, that's a zone, and now the zone has 12 users. Because logically that makes sense. We actually have a utility that does this for us, just because in large environments this isn't the sort of thing you can pull with Excel. I was at a medical client out in the East Coast, and I met this poor gal. She was trying to do their 500 Unix computer population in Excel, and trying to compare password files in Excel to determine to apply this base rote logic of the 80-20 rule that, hey, if 80% of them are in common, it's fine. She'd been working for a couple months on that, and about throttled me when I came in and had it done in 15 minutes. Everybody else thought it was cool, but I wasn't on her good side. Anyway, if we say this is the engineering set of machines, we've got now 12 users in a zone. Let's say we then throw in, server 3. Maybe that's also got another 10 users. The question becomes, does it match? Is 80% now going to end up in this zone, or is it going to end up in its other zone? Maybe only 4 users were in common, so now we've got zone 2. But the real problem we're finding, and this is what's funny, because you'd think in common is, it's like the old joke around the definition of the word is. How do you determine in common? You've got 6 or 7 fields in a password file, depending on how you look at it. And a good example is one of our retail customers. Really well-managed Unix namespace. Beautiful namespace. Everyone had a common UID. They'd hung themselves trying to do that. It was a massive project, trying to get everyone down to a common UID. And almost everyone had a common home directory. And when we did a population analysis across their, 600 or 800 home office servers, what we found out was they were doing a lot of primary GID-based role assignment for purposes of suitors and also grants, so that in one machine you'd be an administrator, group 1, or group 10 on Linux, right? On another machine, you wouldn't be an administrator. There should be no reason that those machines should not fit in a zone, except for one person's an administrator. Right. And that was one of our bigger design challenges is how do you handle that? Do we actually have to carve this machine off and put it into a zone unto itself because this one person's primary security assignment is so very different than all the other machines in that population? And that's where we'll actually look at the password file pretty much as kind of analogous to primary keys in a database table, where we'll figure out, okay, if these ones match, this is good enough, and anything else we then talk to a customer, can we remediate this, like home directories, right? It's export home on Solaris, it's home on Linux. Can we, do something stupid like symlink it or move it, or do you guys want to go to consolidated like NFS, where we could then remote mount all of their home directories under the banner of deploying DirectControl, which is actually what I can think of like 3 customers in the last year have done that. They said, yeah, well, DirectControl is a great product, and we can also do NFS, and they've sold their management on that idea and we get NFS, and they don't mention the fact that they're, trying to remediate their Unix namespace behind the scenes.
Sure. But it sounds like even if you've fixed and cleaned up your Unix namespace, you still end up with challenges with respect to how to do administration and which users have admin rights on specific machines.
Yeah.
Is that an area that we can fix with the zone technology?
Somewhat. I think that's kind of... See, the problem there's 2 classes of... 3 lots. I'll talk about 2 classes of problem. The first one is folks who are using wheel. I'll talk about wheel, and then I'll talk about sudoers. Wheel bugs me. Wheel bugs me from a design perspective because wheel is group 10 on Linux, and it has different meaning if you throw in Solaris. So immediately the challenge becomes if you're using wheel as your primary administrative control method, which often I find is like misconfigured. People don't set up PAM right, and they then think it's working, and it's not, and everyone's still got the root password. They just think wheel is working.
So what are they doing here?
They're putting somebody into a group 10 and then not finishing the equation and getting wheel up and running by configuring PAM to allow them to have administrative rights by being in group 10. The problem, though, from a design perspective, is if on Solaris you're a member of group users, also GID 10, you throw those 2 machines in a zone, just because of the different operating environments there, Solaris and Linux. If you're then a Solaris user, you all of a sudden got administrative privileges granted to you on the Linux servers, which would be totally inappropriate.
Right.
The other problem I'm seeing is variants on sudoers themes, which these aren't new ones. I've been seeing these for about 10 years now, and it's people who'll do sudoers based on the user's name. That's really awesome. I just was at a California-based company, actually a financial, and they had primary sudoers based on username. So you think that's pretty secure. It's really locked down. One of their users got married, and she had accounts on like 250, 300 servers, and they had no consolidated way of pushing sudoers out previously to update her rights across all of the machines. And the other problems we're finding is that primary GID-based assignment on sudoers where that group now has special meaning, and if it exists across N+1 platforms, it becomes a design challenge. So for zones, what I'm more excited about is what we're doing with roles and rights coming up with direct authorize, where we'll be able to have it be a secondary group-based membership, and when a user is added to an Active Directory group, they inherit a right to go ahead and actually do things on that box. I was actually talking about that with my evil twin earlier today at lunch, and the discussion was we have a lot of customers who have dynamic user populations. They'll have a machine that you need access to just temporarily, just for the day, just for the week, and then you're no longer supposed to have access to it. And because when you put a machine into a zone, if going back to our example here, right, we've got this 10 machine, these 2 machines, let's say this is the engineering zone, it's got 2 machines. This is an incredibly twee example. But, we then add our temporary user, and this temporary user needs only access to this machine for, 1 week. If we add them into a zone, contractor, administrator, somebody who's just shown up, if we put them into the zone, they're going to have access to all the resources in that zone. Historically, the way we would have solved for this would be to build a PAM allow, PAM deny scheme in the back end, but we found that we can't push that effectively in services because it creates an explosion of Active Directory groups. Really what we end up is one Active Directory group for every computer at the worst case scenario.
Right.
And nobody wants that in a large environment where you've got 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 Unix machines. That's just going to kill you. So instead what we're looking at is if we can add this person to a role group that's allowed to log in on this machine as a one-off, that they've got the right to log in like by SSH or FTP or whatever they need to do their job. That'll get us over that design hurdle of, the tendency otherwise in zoning is to say, well, why not one zone per computer if you need that level of granularity?
I'm assuming that the right you're going to grant this person is more than just the basic access right. You're also going to be able to give them additional rights?
Oh, yeah, sure, whatever they need to do their job. If they're an administrator who's been hired on for 1 week, a contractor who's just coming in to do, advanced server configuration, right? You'd give them those additional rights, but make sure that they get revoked. So it's not just the machine access, but it's also actually what they can do with that machine when they get in, which is pretty exciting because historically that's been a real falling down point on Unix. I've only worked with Unix for 15 years, so maybe they had it solved before I showed up. I doubt it, but I can always be optimistic, right? But it's been how do you grant somebody permissions to do something has always been consistently across everything under the sun. We just haven't had that. It's always been, you've got RBAC on Solaris, right? It's great. It's awesome. It works on Solaris. What if you've got AIX? What if you've got HBUX? What if you've got older versions that don't support RBAC? So that's why I get excited about direct authorized, just the ability to consolidate that, which I think will be important for our enterprise customers and larger customers, the Fortune 10, because they need that level of granularity. But I also think it'll help probably a lot of our smaller shops, just for those scenarios where they've got temporary employees coming in to help over the holidays, and they've got some Linux-based POS system, point of sale, that runs the cash register, right? And that they can grant them access to log in using consolidated credentials and run the cash register, and at the end of their gig, they can leave, and we don't worry about them having access to the till.
Right. So what about those customers that wanted to actually get to a single identity? Is there a way to do that or a methodology that we use to accomplish that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, really the question becomes, in that case, around UID management. And I'm going to delete this. What we've really settled on in terms of a best practice in this arena is the concept of a universal zone. Although one of our customers, another media company, actually was offended by us calling it the universal zone. It's kind of funny that way. But the idea here is that we define all of our users and all of our groups. You get a single UID and a single GID associated with those in the universal zone, and then we actually have n+1 output zones where we copy those into those output zones. We're finding that...
So you're grouping the computers in these output zones as a way to grant access to resources?
Well, based on what the application needs are or based on the existing user population. Given no other data, we'll consider user population. If we're given an additional layer of data, like this zone might be based on host name. Right, and all this is covered in our standard training, so I won't go through it. But this might be based on machine's host name prefix. So everything that starts with ABC here, all of those hosts are in that zone. This might be based on application, and this one, so this might be WebSphere.
Right, or web farm, something.
Yeah, and this one here, I don't know, what could we base it on? Geography.
Yeah, geography department.
And this will be, like Tulsa, right? And then based on rules that we'll define, we'll say, okay, if you're in this rule, rules being Active Directory groups essentially is a way of thinking about it, you're granted access into these zones. So a system administrator would have a single UID defined in the universal zone, but across all of those platforms, they'd have a single common UID, which is important, particularly for the systems administration community, because, let's face it, we got to copy our tools onto machines, and if you can stand up NFS, that rocks, because now my backup makes sense, and also my file permissions make sense for doing consolidated, the ability to get all my administrative files. What we find, though, it's kind of fun with this. People go down to a single common GID. A lot of what we're seeing in this example is there'll be some just, company corp staff, GID 10,000, everybody becomes a member of corp staff as their primary Unix GID, and then what happens is you get all of your grants for your roles and your rights in sudoers based on secondary groups, which has been a best practice with sudoers for years now, and we're finally seeing that take. Right. But the way these lines work, that's what we call zone gen. Zone gen is one of my favorite little tools that actually handles that automated provisioning from the universal zone down into these managed zones. I'll give an example. Like, this is a real workflow. I'll remove the customer, but what they're doing with zone gen, let's see, who do we have? We've got the help desk. We've got the, let's say the manager, user. I suppose we need to have one of those. I've always heard that computers would work better if you didn't have those. So we've got a user, we've got a help desk, we've got a manager, we've got a universal zone, and then we've got an AD group, and I'll get really specific here, and then we've got actually we'll call it the ABC zone. Right? So anyway, what will happen here is, I don't like that line already, the user will file some kind of form, verbally or automatically, or some website inner tubes, Web 2.0, paper-based, I don't know. Anyway, it goes off to their manager, and their manager comes back and says, hey, yeah, that's cool. You can have access to these Unix resources. And then what the manager will do is they'll actually just send a form to the help desk. Previously, this would have been the Unix team, right? This would have been us. We would have been trying to actually do work, like get a machine back online or stage a new machine or do something, right? Just all the normal operational activities that happen with a modern Unix environment. Life happens. So Unix would have normally been involved. And instead, we've got people who are help desk who, bless their hearts, the new guys, fresh out of college, de-skilled resources, can run Active Directory users and computers. What they'll do is they'll actually fire up Active Directory users and computers, create a new Unix profile in this universal zone here, and then what they'll do is they'll actually add that user to an Active Directory group that represents the Unix resources which the user was requesting access to.
So you're using a group as a way to grant access to the Unix resources.
That's right. And then what will happen is, I forgot to put zone gen on here. Zone gen, on a periodic basis, zone gen will read that Active Directory group, and then it'll go find the profiles out of the universal zone and say, oh, hey, look, there's somebody new, and they're in this Active Directory group that grants you access to the ABC zone. And so it'll copy their profile automatically into the ABC zone. So what's really cool here is, two things. First of all, the Unix guys, we can actually do work. The other thing is I've used this now successfully with auditors to show that this is a software control that enforces a process control. The process control being this first part, the forms-based, paper-based paper trail, and the software control being the only way you can get granted access to Unix is to be in one of these groups. This is our provisioning mechanism for Unix. There's no other magic provisioning software occurring, and consequently, the auditors they eat this stuff up because they go, okay, so, and then they can do a report using native Active Directory tools for who did what to whom. Mr. Brown and the candlestick in the library. That level of detail makes auditors fabulously happy. And it also, like I say, this is a lot more efficient to have a help desk as opposed to the Unix personnel actually do our account provisioning.
And I'm assuming you have the ability also to make changes to the Unix profile, because we know that the Unix profile is made up of more than just the UID and the GID. So what if the home directory or the shell needs to be different? for the destination zone the user needs access to. How is that handled?
Actually, I'm pretty happy about that too. That's one of the bigger challenges we had in earlier versions of ZoneGen. It was just our way or the highway. Everything's when you're in the universal zone, you get yourself. Obviously, you get a UID, a GID, home and shell, right? Geckos, we hang off a display name and username. Nah,
sure.
Yeah. But for the home and the shell, we're actually able to do per zone level overrides. So if you're ABC zone right here, maybe that's just a normal zone, and its mount point is home, right? Fine. Let's say then you've got the imaginally named Mac zone. It's all of our Mac desktop publishing systems, and it's /users. We can actually do, for that zone, the Mac zone, a home directory level override so that the user still gets their primary UID and GID out of here, but instead of having their standard stock home directory, it hangs off of users. So then, and actually I just saw that example where they were doing NFS and AFP off of the same device for getting at the user's files.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so there's wacky stuff out there.
So I guess in that case, NFS and AFP off the same device. How is that just for centralized home directories?
Yeah.
Great. Well, it sounds like we've been able to solve a lot of different customers' problems with both zones, ZoneGen, as well as our deployment tools and the skills and technology and the capabilities of our professional services staff. Zones is our patent-pending technology and is one of those things that we've built from day one of our product in order to make sure that DirectControl can be deployed to any number of these organizations, especially given that we run across organizations that can be very complex as well as those that are very simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's zones are great. I mean, I years ago in a past life tried to sell UID rationalization to management. Where you'd go down to a single namespace, the single one true nirvana of Unix, and you'd tell them, look, I'm going to take this number, and I'm going to make it that number, and it's going to cost you this number, and they'd miss the first part. They'd catch on that third one, which was staff time and resources, and at that point they'd say no, and that's been...
Well, I'm sure there's other business reasons why you might not want to change the UIDs as well.
Exactly.
Given backup tapes and a lot of the other historical data that's still tied to those, given that it's the native way for Unix systems to control access.
Yeah. So it was, anything that requires a flat namespace, that where you're going to have no level of granularity, no level of flexibility, just I don't think has got any place in the modern Unix environment.
Well, the same could be said about the method of administration as well, in that even if you did integrate the namespace down to one consolidated UID, you still more than likely need a method to manage the administrators and which systems they can be administrated.
Oh yeah, and what they can actually do with those machines too. That's really key. What we're finding is if you actually sit down and read GLBA or PCI or SOX, it's really about who can do what.
Right.
And it's scary as the audit market evolves, the auditors are getting better.
They're getting smarter because they have to.
I didn't say that. I was being gentle. The fact is, we got an audit community out there that started off as financial auditors. I actually have an in-law who's a forensic accountant, and she's learning Unix. And the reason she's learning Unix is she can take those forensic skills that she learned, right, to help troubleshoot things like Enron, and apply them to a Unix environment. So you get somebody who's got that level of curiosity. These people are now starting to read the spec and go, okay, show me really what's your software control. They don't just care, oh, look, you've got your UID space, and it's all great. That matters not one bit to them. What matters to them is who can modify financial data and how, and what controls are in place to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, and that we have the ability to control and also report on that as well. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Kayne.